Hi, I just wanted to recap the three pillars that we went through in the classroom. I do this because a lot of people, when I get the case studies through, they kind of squash this down, and it kind of comes across as a bit irrelevant. This is so relevant for a lot of clients, regardless of what's happened to them or what they've done in their life. This is very, very, very relevant for most people that I see. So I think it's very important to be able to explain it. You don't have to do it like I explain it, but there's just certain parts of it that I think are very important for the client to understand, really, because more often than not, well, they will never have seen this. This is developed by Andy Austin to work with intractable anxiety and depression. I get that we can get depression, anxiety from lots of different things, and depression as well, and they may not fit into these categories. But for the people it does, this is so helpful. So I want to get across to you guys as well as my clients that these are about breaking of rules, okay? But it's about breaking of their own rules. Obviously, growing up, we break other people's rules, and it doesn't have the same effect. And as we get older, breaking other people's rules doesn't have the same effect. We can break the speed limit, for instance, and it doesn't have the same effect on us. We don't feel that guilty unless we get caught. So this was brought out by Andy many years ago, when he was working with people with anxiety, but wasn't really getting very far with it. So he developed this because he spoke to a lot of people and found that a lot of these elements were relevant to his clients. And when he worked with those, he was getting much better results. So how I work with this, I get the client sat in front of me. We'll do the little tester pattern, the little 6 times each way. Then I'll get them to go through whatever it is that's the big thing for them, the reason why they've come to me in the first place. And we'll work with that and go with that. And then what I'll do is I'll introduce this. Now, when I'm sat in my client room, I don't do this over Zoom personally. When I'm sat in my client room with clients, I have a board behind me, not this one. I've got a big whiteboard, and I leave it completely blank when they come in. I don't want to overwhelm things. And once we've done the little tester pattern and the main reason they've come to me, which may have some of these elements in there as well, but that doesn't matter, I'll explain this to them. Now, I don't write depression on the top. I'll write this out, but I don't write depression on the top, okay? One of the reasons why I don't is because most clients will come to me and they won't have depression. They'll have anxiety or something else. And the minute you introduce a word to them, they'll take that on board, because some people will think that, oh, well, actually, these things are relevant to me, so I must have depression as well. Don't want to go down that road, okay? I'm not here to diagnose people. And in fact, I'm not really interested in the diagnosis at all. So this is what I do. I write this out for them. I do obviously this line and these two, and then I fill these columns in. And that's all I do, okay? And I'll say, okay, so just give me a minute while I just fill this in, and then I'll explain to you what it's all about. And like I say before, people haven't seen this before. Like I say, it's very specific to IEMT. Even counsellors and stuff, they're absolutely blown away by this. When I get clients who are counsellors, they'll take a photo of this because they can actually use this with their own stuff, even not doing IEMT. Just to get people aware of how they're functioning and how they're actually processing their own stuff. So I'll write down guilt, regret, remorse, and shame, and anxiety, panic, and worry, and anger and temper. Okay, and then I will put on it. Okay, so this first column is about the past. Guilt, regret, remorse, and shame is about the past. We don't feel guilty about things we haven't done yet, generally. And specifically, these are about rules. Okay, but it's about our rules. Like I said at the beginning, this is very, very important for people to understand this. Now, it's about our own unique rules, nobody else's. Okay, we did the old stuff when we was growing up, the feeling bad for other people or being in trouble with other people. Whereas now we develop, as we get older, our own beliefs and values around stuff we've learned growing up from parents and caregivers. Okay. And these become very specific to us. So guilt, regret, remorse, and shame is my stuff. Okay, not anybody else's. Which again, why you go and speak to a friend and they don't understand, that's why, because this is about me. And I also, so this is I think this is very useful when I'm working with clients as well. It might be useful for yourselves as well. When I go through this, I always tell the client not to kind of dismiss the small stuff, because quite often the things that have been played down by other people are the things that they omit to work with. And they think it's just the big traumatic events that are going to really create things like this. But we know from many years of working with clients that it doesn't work like that. More often than not, it's the small things that they haven't considered or they've dismissed that are the problem for people. So guilt is one of the first things children learn. Okay, I always say this, and to be fair, from my experience, that's how it was. So from day dot, parents use guilt as a control element, a control method. Okay, so we generally know how that feels. Regret is where we break one of our own rules, okay, and it has an impact directly on ourselves. So I'm suffering consequences, the consequences of my own actions, okay? Now, it could be that I've done something or I've omitted to do something. It can go either way, okay? Remorse is where we break one of our own rules, beliefs, or values, and it has an impact on somebody else. Okay, so which is why prisoners are asked to show remorse before they're released from prison. And shame. This is an interesting one. Shame has the observer element to it. So it feels bad because other people know. But also we can feel ashamed of ourselves. Okay. Once we've done something bad and the brain catches up and we can feel ashamed of what we've done, that's kind of, it goes a bit into identity. So it's not overly important. I don't kind of go too deeply in with that with the clients, but I will explain these as I've just explained to yourselves. Guilt, regret, remorse, and shame is about the past, our own beliefs and values, the breaking of. Okay. Now, not everybody will feel all of those things. Somebody may just feel one of those things, which is fine. Okay, it kind of triggers off the next part of this anyway. So in the middle column, we have anxiety, panic, and worry. Most people who are experiencing one of these things will generally go into this middle column. Now, the middle column is about the future, okay? And anxiety is anticipatory. So it's what we think may happen or what we think could happen. So this is about not knowing the rules or being in charge or in control. Most people who are anxious write lists. Okay, they're the people who organize things just to make sure that it goes right, because they're so worried about somebody else cocking things up. Okay, anxiety and worry, generally the same kind of thing. People use the words differently, but to mean the same things. Okay, some people will say, actually, I don't get anxiety, but I worry quite a lot. We can work with it the same way. Okay, now panic. Panic, there's two folds here that I found with working with clients. So panic, we have, so anxiety and worry, we kind of distract ourselves. So we get a little bit of an adrenaline thing going on, that's because we're feeling a little bit worried about stuff, but we can generally distract from that. Now, panic is where it trips that physiological threshold and goes into something that we can no longer control. So we go into the panic attack, or what's known as panic attack. Some people call them anxiety attacks. Same kind of thing. Now, there's only two reasons I've ever come across in nearly 13 years of client work why people have panic attacks. Okay. Firstly, trauma. Okay. And trauma, as we'll find out in the PTSD stuff, doesn't need to be very traumatic. It's all about an internalization of whatever's going on. Okay, it's a very personal perception of an event that we've suffered from or that we've experienced will give us whatever it is that we're experiencing. So trauma can be very small on it to the onlookers, if you like, but very traumatic to the person experiencing it. Now, so panic, trauma, but also recreational drug misuse. That's the only two things I've ever found that trigger panic attacks. And I've never come across anybody who has panic attacks who hasn't had one of those things. Okay, so generally things like a whitey on weed, cannabis, people go into that panic state. Or health can do it, but that can be classified as a kind of a trauma. So always look at that. If people are having panic attacks, I generally ask, have you ever had a traumatic experience? And if they say not really, say, okay, so have you ever done any recreational drugs? More often than I always say, I'm not here to judge, by the way. More often than not, yes, that's what it is. And I go back to the first time they can remember having a whitey, sorts it out, stops the panic attacks happening. Okay, so any one or more of these things in the middle column will generally lead to something in the third column, anger or temper. We can write frustration in there as well, it kind of fits in. But this kind of simplifies it, okay? Now, anger and temper is about the here and now, okay? So what's happening in that moment? And generally, people kick off because they are feeling anxious, okay? They may be just angry people, but more often than not, when people come in to see you because they're feeling bad about stuff, it's generally because it's an offshoot of anxiety or worry or panic. Now, anger in this kind of terminology is what we feel, temper is what we do. Okay, not everybody does both, not everybody does either. But most people, if you ask them, more often than not, again, if they're here for anxiety, this will be a thing for them. Okay, now this is quite interesting as well. Again, two reasons why people kind of go into the anger stuff. Again, one's trauma and the other one is learned behavior. So, and when I explain that to clients, I always say, you know, sometimes trauma will trigger, because the anxiety is there, will trigger that, but more often than not, and I mean the vast majority, they've learned this from growing up, okay? And it could be a parent, it could be somebody close to them, but it's generally something that they've picked up when they were younger. Now, this last column, though, is about other people breaking our rules. We generally get angry because somebody else has pissed us off. Okay, so we go into this, and because we've done that to the people closest to us, this is the other thing as well. People generally don't lose their shit with other people. Okay, we do get the angry people, like I say, we get the angry people out in the street, but they've got their own thing going on. When we're sat with a client, generally the people who are suffering this little self-perpetuating cycle, they're not generally the just angry people because they feel bad about stuff. So when they get angry or have a temper, they do it to the people who are closest to them. That's generally what I find. And I've worked with lots and lots of clients, and this is very relevant for near enough all of them. So because they've done it to the people closest to them, because that's where they've learned it in the family household when they were growing up, generally, because it's out of context, because they've probably lost the shit for no reason, we go back into this first column. Okay, so we may feel guilty or regret what we've just done or said, or feel remorseful or shame or all of those things for that thing. So that is the three pillars. Now, how we work with this, again, it's very, very simple. We pick something that's relevant for the first column. We'll ask the client, have a look at the first column. Is there anything relevant for you? More often than not, they will say yes. Again, if they're sat in front of you, there's a reason for that. So, okay, so we'll pick guilt just as a for instance. Okay, so guilt. How strong is guilt for you? Out of 10, with 10 being as strong as it can be. And how familiar is guilt for you? And when is the first time that you can remember feeling guilty? Now, it may not be the first time it ever happened, but it's the first time that you can remember now. And how vivid's the memory? Okay, hold that memory, waveful on my finger. Okay, so just go through the process. Tick each one off. They may only have one. Okay, that's fine. Just work with that one. They may have several, and that's okay as well. So go back to the first time. Now, I always explain this bit as well, because I think this is very helpful. So if we did a bit of a timeline, beginning of time, future, and where they are now, we have specific memories about certain events in life. And I think this is very important as well. So we can have several major events in life, or not even big stuff, but just stuff that we remember as being unpleasant in some way. Okay, these work a little bit differently. They're very specific. These are very linear. They happen more often than not. People who are in this cycle do these things pretty much every day. So to pick specifics out would be a bit of a nightmare. Okay, so how I work this, or how I explain it to the client, is we can work with these ones with specific memory, because you'll go straight back to that. But these ones, because you'll probably feel guilty 1,000 times in your lifetime, going back to a specific, we're not going to get anywhere, because it's not really going to change anything. So if we think about that, we've had all of these different times in our life where we felt guilty, and if I said to somebody, right, when's the worst time you can remember? Generally, the last time they felt it. Because for some reason, as we get older, we get better at feeling crap about stuff. So we do it better, which is a bit weird, but we just do. But if we go this way backwards, we'll be there for a month trying to get through them all. Okay, so it's a bit pointless. So what we do is what I explain to the client, although it comes out in the questioning, but I think we need to kind of just zone that in a little bit so they can kind of get a bit more of understanding. We go back to the earliest time they can remember feeling a particular feeling. Now, it doesn't have to be the first time it ever happened, as in the question. It just has to be the first time that they can remember feeling that way. Okay, that takes a little bit of pressure off, because obviously people will say, well, I know I felt it before that. It doesn't matter. So the first time you can remember feeling this way, that's what we work with. Okay, so I explained that. So this works for all of these things. Now, very important, this middle column is a byproduct of the two outer columns. Okay, that's it's the autonomic nervous system overreacting to other feelings. Okay, which is why we get anxiety and panicky, which is why it's physiological. Okay, this and this column are the only two columns we need to work with. Okay, so work with the first column and go through okay, I'm going to score out of 10 how strong is guilt for you. When's the first time you can remember? Yeah, go back to here, work through that, do the eye patterns. Then what we do is finish that column, skip onto the last column. Is anger and temper a thing for you? Yeah, okay. When is the first time you can remember feeling that way? You don't need to score anger and temper, because anger and temper is in the here and now. Guilt and stuff, because they can access that feeling. That's easy to get a score up for. But anger and temper, you could say to them, okay, so at worst, what's the angriest you get out of 10? Well, 10 out of 10, because generally they're below the lid. But we don't need to do that bit, okay? We don't need to say, okay, so on a score out of 10, all we do is, okay, so how familiar is anger for you? And when is the first time you can remember feeling this way? And blah, blah, and go through that way, okay? And how vivid is the memory? Now, a good tip for you is that when you've done anger or temper or both, or whatever you've worked with, go back to asking this question. And again, this sounds a little bit weird, but everybody gets it. Everybody seems to understand it. And when is the first time you can remember somebody else feeling this way? You may get a bit of a blank look to start with, or a bit of a, what do you mean? But they will get it. They always do. They always do. And then once you've got an answer for that, they don't need to tell you what the details in that is, but they'll go, oh yeah, okay. So, and when is the first time you can remember? When is the first time you can remember seeing somebody doing this? So basically taking them back to their earliest memory of somebody else being that way. Okay. And then get them to hold that image memory and take their eyes through that one as well. Generally, and fingers crossed, but I generally get a really, really good result with that. Okay. So work with their stuff first and then somebody else that they remember being that way as well. Okay. Now it doesn't need to be directed to them. It could be directed to somebody else and they're just witnessing these things. Because I grew up that way as well. My mum and dad used to argue like mad all the time. And it wasn't always directed at me, but I grew up to be a miserable sod at home because that's kind of how I grew up. That's how I knew how to do it. So that's basically your 3 pillars. Okay. Get the client to understand that it's their rules, their beliefs and values, nobody else's. Okay. Take them on, just get them to understand what these things are. Most people know what guilt is. If they don't know what that is, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Regret and remorse, just make sure they understand the difference between them, although culturally, some Eastern Asians don't get that. It doesn't work. I've had clients before where some of those things mean the same thing. So it all kind of rolls into one. But because I've explained what it is here, they can kind of get their own thing around it and it makes sense. Okay, so they work with whatever it is for them in particular. Okay, just explain it as I've explained it. Very, very simple. It's kind of simple, but it takes a bit of time. Okay, so as long as I've taken to explain this, I want you to kind of try to take that much time with your clients because we're not trying to rush this. We want them to understand because the more they understand, the better outcome you're going to get. Okay, so that's the 3 pillars. Thanks for watching, and I'll do another one soon. Okay, take care.